Hello, welcome to Postcolonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and in today's conversation, I will briefly add a supplement to my series on Gayatri Spivak's Can the Subaltern Speak? Now, if you've already watched my 5 lectures on the essay, you're probably already familiar with my explanation of it, and then I'm hoping you've also read the essay. But today I want to go over the slight revision of the essay, especially of its conclusion that Spivak offers in her, of course, book, A Critique of Postcolonial Reason. And you'll be able to find it between pages from 306 till 311. But I will specifically read a little bit from page 308, what she says there, and then offer what she says on page 310, and then briefly explain my understanding of it, which should serve as a good supplement to an understanding of the article, Can the Subaltern Speak? Now, if you recall the original article, in the original article, Spivak had ended her essay with the declaration that subaltern cannot speak. She had narrated to us the story of a young woman, right? Swari, who had committed suicide. And when she talks to her surviving grandnieces, she realizes that even they didn't know what the reason was, right? And that answer, because they thought it appears that it was a case of illicit love, the very thing that she, Swari, didn't want to be construed from her death. So Spivak writes, I was so unnerved by this failure of communication that in the first version of this text, which is the essay Can the Subaltern Speak, I wrote in the accents of passionate lament, the subaltern cannot speak. It was an inadvisable remark. Now remember, she's not repudiating that remark. She's saying it was inadvisable. In the intervening years between the publication of the second part of this chapter in essay form and this revision, I have profited greatly from the many published responses to it. I will refer to 2 of them here, Can the Subaltern Vote and Silencing Psychorax. So these were 2 of the many essays that were written in response to Can the Subaltern Speak, claiming that there are different ways in which subaltern does speak and can be heard. And she's responding to 2 of these essays. And she writes, as I've been insisting, Swari Bahadri was not a true subaltern. She was a woman of middle class with access, however clandestine, to the bourgeois movement for independence. Indeed, the Rani of Simur, with her claim to elevated birth, was not a subaltern at all. Part of what I seem to have argued in this chapter is that women's interception of the claim to subalternity can be staked out across strict lines of definition by virtue of their muting by heterogeneous circumstances. So the first response that she's giving to people who say, well, Swari wasn't necessarily a subaltern. And she, of course, knows that. What she's saying is that what she's attempting to articulate isn't that essentially this person or that person is a subaltern, but how is a person silenced or muted, or their path to voice is stopped, or path to becoming a non-subaltern subject is closed off. And that is why when she goes on to explaining her conclusion of Swari's silencing, she says that she didn't mean that colonialism silenced her. What she is saying is, I'm pointing rather at her silencing by her own more emancipated granddaughters, a mainstream. To this can be added 2 newer groups, One, the liberal multiculturalist Metropolitan Academy, and the cultural production associated with it. So her point in Can the Subaltern Speak was that what baffled her was that the very people who were supposed to know her, right, who were supposed to know her history and her expression through her death, were the very people who were misreading it, just like those who indulge in the studies of multiculturalism as what she would eventually call the cultural informants, who otherwise might have liberal tendencies and might, believe in natural birth and natural foods, but they don't see a contradiction in working for great corporations as cultural informants and enabling the great corporations in selling products or in their imperial capitalistic project in the developing world itself, right? And then she gives us 3 points, and she's saying, here, let us remain confined to the field of academic prose and advance 3 points. This is on page 310. 1. Simply by being post-colonial or the member of an ethnic minority, we are not subaltern. That word is reserved for the sheer heterogeneity of decolonized space. Okay, sheer heterogeneity of decolonized spaces that were previously colonized. Within that, subalterns can be dispersed over different territories depending on their class, depending on where they are at a certain space in the post-colonies. 2. When a line of communication is established between a member of subaltern groups and the circuits of citizenship or institutionality, the subaltern has been inserted into the long road to hegemony. The subaltern has become part of the hegemonic project of the state, right? Unless we want to be romantic purists or primitivists about preserving subalternity, a contradiction in terms, this is absolutely to be desired, right? What we need to desire is that the subaltern should move into voice, political, and become part of the hegemonic project of the state, right? We should not try to preserve the subaltern in his or her purity. Remembering this allows us to take pride in our work without making missionary claims, right? Pride in our work in enabling or creating spaces where the subalterns can move into the hegemonic project of the state. 3. This trace structure, effacement in disclosure, surfaces as the tragic emotions of political activists, springing not out of superficial utopianism, but out of the depths of what Bimal Krishna Motilal has called moral love. Mahashweta Devi herself, an indefatigable activist, documents this emotion with exquisite care in Petrodactyl, Puran Shahi, and Pirtha. So this emotion of feeling what Spivak felt at the moment when she tells the Bhubaneswari story, this feeling that the subaltern cannot represent herself, cannot speak for herself, stems from that desire, right, of seeing the subaltern come to voice, or imagining the subaltern to come to voice, and not nostalgia for a non-mutable, non-changeable subaltern position, right? So these are the 3 things that she wants us to keep in mind as we think about the subaltern. And then there is a really interesting ending to this chapter. And she says, today's program of global financialization carries on that relay. Bhubaneswari had fought for national liberation. Her great-grandniece works for the new empire. This too is a historical silencing of the subaltern. How? When the news of this young woman's promotion was broadcast in the family, Amidst general jubilation, I could not help remarking to the eldest surviving female member, Bhubaneswari, her nickname had been Thalu, hanged herself in vain, but not too loudly. Is it any wonder that this young woman is a staunch multiculturalist, believes in natural childbirth, and wears only cotton? So why is Spivak lamenting that? First of all, that this young woman is the inheritor of the tradition of resistance to colonizers, which previously occupied the territory but now colonized the globe through neoliberal capital, right? And one would have hoped that with that kind of heritage, this person would at least advocate against the aggressive nature of neoliberal capital, right? Not become its insider, not become a cultural informant who is picked up because of his or her native identity, and who then informs the corporation as to how to succeed in India, how to market commodities to Bangladesh or Pakistan. It is that role which is apolitical and in the service of global capital that Spivak is lamenting and criticizing. Even though this person, by the things that she associates with her, tends to be the very image of what we consider a liberal, progressive, right, diasporic Indian who might apparently still be in touch with our culture. So overall then, in this revision of Can the Subaltern Speak, what Spivak is openly acknowledging is that her conclusion was hasty. But what she's also trying to teach us is that, yeah, the subaltern can vote, or maybe someone can come along after 40 years and read the Subaltern, read Bhubaneswari's text. But what she's talking about is within the immediacy of the act, can the subaltern be heard? And two, does her own family, who inherited her story, understand her act? So overall, this revision, and she will move on to the next chapter in this book to theorize and talk about the role of the cultural informant. What Spivak is saying is, here are my revised views about Rani of Simur, as well as about my essay, Can the Subaltern Speak? I have read the criticisms of it, and here is my response to it. And part of it is she saying, I don't want to fetishize the figure of the subaltern. I am for the subaltern to move into, through an act of communication and politics, into becoming the part of the hegemonic project of the state. But let's also, with this knowledge, take a look at these liberal, progressive, activist people who have a certain claim to this heritage, might be multiculturalist, but still have no qualms about being part of the very machine of capital which is perpetuating new modes of imperialism and colonialisms in the old colonies and new. So these are some of my thoughts as a kind of a supplement to my previous conversations on Spivak's Can the Subaltern Speak. For, of course, more details, I highly recommend that you read A Critique of Postcolonial Reason, but I hope this suffices as a brief summary and some of my thoughts on the subject. Thank you so much, and as always, stay safe, take care, and I will now see you next time. Until then, peace and love.